This video lecture addresses states, and this is our first step in beginning our discussion and explanation of different institutional structures in politics. States are one form of social organization, and today the most common form, but they have common structural and functional characteristics. Our common everyday use of the word state corresponds with units within a larger geographical unit referred to as a country. So when we talk about states, we mean North Carolina, Alabama, etc. And that's in our regular use of the term. But in academic terms, the definition of state more corresponds to the term country than to the way that we refer to the smaller units that comprise our entire country. The formal definition of states comes from the work of Max Weber, and he wrote that they were organizations with a monopoly on the legitimate use of violence within a fixed geographical territory. This definition sets the modern standard for the three keys to state sovereignty. These are self-rule, territorial monopoly, and control of violence. So we refer to the British state, the American state, the Israeli state, and so forth as a way of identifying the geographical location of these entities, but we also mean a government and set of institutions that are attached to that particular authority. So prior to states, you had other forms of social organization, and that's what these maps show and what we're about to talk about. Prior to states, the major forms of social organization included the great empires of ancient Greek, Roman, African, and Persian civilizations. Also included the age of colonialism, which was an act of rapid empire building among primarily European states. Organization under religious authority, and also feudalism, which was a specific form of agrarian property ownership that allowed nobility to control large swaths of land and the peasants that occupied it. In addition, modern warfare changing had a lot to do with the rise of states, in addition to other social and historical factors. One was the Protestant Reformation in Europe, which challenged the monopoly of the Catholic Church and took away some of its wealth as well as its ideological control. The Catholic Church remains one of the largest property owners of the world, and in the 1500s they owned the majority of the wealth in the world as well. New war technologies allowed for smaller territories to defend themselves long enough to establish themselves as states. The British and the French, for example, benefited from being able to defend territory from raiders like the Vikings with longbow and cannons. In addition, as the merchant class emerged in Europe, they provided important financial support for kings to develop their militaries and defend these territories. By 1648, the Treaty of Westphalia established the principle of sovereign states, meaning that the authority of states and the rulers, the monarchs at the time, were supreme authority of their territory, and it became a violation of this treaty to interfere with the operation of other states. They still did so in the name of establishing a Protestant or Catholic authority in the government, in spite of the fact that the treaty came after the 30 Years' War, which was fought over the very problem of states fighting on behalf of their preferred religious doctrine. Another set of important terms when it comes to social organization is the definition of nation, which in common everyday use is used interchangeably with the term country. In academic usage, however, the term nation refers to a group of people with a common heritage that could include, but does not necessarily include, skin color, religion, ethnicity, language, history, social practices, and culture. A nation may or may not be contained in only one state. For example, Roma people are considered stateless nations. They occupy Europe in different states in Europe, but they have no separate state of their own. Similarly to Native Americans, the Kurdish people, the Rohingya Muslims, and many others. The idea of a nation-state refers to a social arrangement where the geographical territory is occupied by one nation, and this goal emerged in Europe as states evolved as the primary means of social organization. The goal of creating a nation-state made up of one nation is often aligned with feelings of nationalism or a strong sense of identifying with your nation over others. Nationalism has a long history of creating separatist movements with sovereign states that often results in civil wars, but also is responsible for the nationalist sentiments that achieved, for example, Indian independence. So, essentially, when multiple fractures in society occur between nations within a state, it can weaken the connection that citizens have with the state. On the other hand, it can create those connections necessary in former colonies. So, colonization has a lot to do with how nationalism plays out as well, because sometimes ethnicities were put into states for the purposes of administration in colonies instead of cultural reasons. And so that led to tensions down the road between warring ethnicities that were expected to be part of the same nation. Today, the state is the most common form of social organization, with 194 member states who are part of the United Nations. One of the main reasons for the growth of states is that existing states do not conduct business or agreements with any other type of entity. The legal structure provided for by state institutions is preferred, and so it is the norm. States have also been formed to solve conflicts and problems of former colonies, which is often related to nationalism and state building issues that newly independent territories faced. Essentially, there is no non-state option for dealing with other states in the international community. When we study states, we often categorize them based on various features like where power is concentrated or the locus of power, state capacity, and different ways of bestowing citizenship. Unitary states are those where the power of legislation, policing, taxation, and general administration is concentrated in the central government. In such systems, law is uniform throughout the territory, and there is one principal authority. In a federal state, a central government exists, but is in theory equal to or even less powerful than the governments of the constituent units. The degree of autonomy of the constituent units varies greatly around the world. Some unitary states may devolve power to constituent units, but in these cases, the central government always has the power to revoke that power of the smaller units. An example of this is that Great Britain allows for the Scottish and Irish territories to have their own parliaments, but they also reserve the right to recall that power at any time. There are different ways that individuals can obtain citizenship. Jus sanguinis refers to citizenship that is attained through blood. States that confer this type of citizenship usually require one or both parents to be citizens of the state in question before an individual is considered a citizen. Jus soli refers to citizenship of the soil, and people who are born in states that recognize jus soli are automatically considered citizens. The United States recognizes both forms of citizenship, but this is not the case in every other state. In addition, most states have a process of allowing non-citizens to apply for citizenship, and this process is known as naturalization. Naturalization may be quite difficult depending on the state. State capacity is another question, the degree to which a state can carry out its responsibilities. We have failed states, but not very many. That refers to states who have lost the ability to govern a significant portion of their territory. But we also study the capacity of states in terms of their fragility. There are many states in this category. If you go to www.fragilestatesindex.org, you can find more information about which states fall into this category. In some former colonies, the lack of national identity and support for the state is a continued problem, where multiple nations reside in the same territory due to the zoning that was done by previous colonizers. And one of those is a marginalized ethnicity. This can create a lot of pressure on the state organization. Table 4.1 provides information on the combination of states and nations from state first nation states, which include the UK and France, where institutions of the state solidified before national identity, nation first nation states, which include Germany, Italy, and Japan, where the national identity existed prior to the institutions of the state, and a fragmented nation state like the United States or Canada, where many nations exist within one territory. And then finally, failed states, which may have warring ethnicities and lack of governance, includes Somalia and Afghanistan. So, a growing interconnectedness between states in the international system sometimes is seen as a potential challenge to state sovereignty. Because of creating obligations at the international level, this can have the effect of taking away some domestic power. And one way to graph that interconnectedness or indicators of globalization is shown here in this figure, where you look at different things like rising international phone calls, people born out of the state of their parents, and finance and trade. So, human rights and international law around trade and finance and the environment are areas that are considered major challenges to state sovereignty, because these involve creating legal obligations of the state at the international level and might remove some of the power of local or domestic decision makers. This may greatly diminish a country's ability to make laws on, for example, child labor or child marriage, which the practices of these things vary around the world, and are seen as very negative in the Western developed world, and it's sometimes seen as necessary in the developing world. So this is sometimes one of the bases for resisting international law. And international law is created and overseen by international organizations where member states' governments come together in order to deliberate and make decisions about international law. Three of the most influential are the World Trade Organization, the United Nations, and the European Union. So this table summarizes some of the competing views on the value of state sovereignty, and these are categorized based on the various ideologies that we've already encountered. The fact that states bring security, belonging, and stability along with representation are positive values that conservatives and liberals focus on, while protecting bad regimes, creating obstacles to global cooperation, exclusion, and oppression are largely seen as negative characteristics that Marxist, Islamist, and environmentalists focus on. So this concludes the brief discussion of states and statehood and some of the connected terms. And in future chapters, we'll be talking more specifically about the institutions of government within states. And I'm ending this video with my favorite internet ludicrousness of the week.